Yeah, thank you very much for accepting this invitation. And for the last days, we have been discussing the topic of places of African philosophies. And I was wondering, in your work as a phenomenologist, you're interested in questions such as world relatedness and Leiblichkeit. And so, what is your stance on the workshop's topic? What could it mean to study the places of philosophy or African philosophy from a phenomenological perspective?
So thank you for the question. Yes, for quite a while during my dissertation, my dissertation paper was on the question of Leiblichkeit and Leib, which means Leiblichkeit is a corporeality. And when we talk about corporeality, we are already talking about the subject's relatedness to the world. And so this is a whole concept. And I find this conference very interesting because the idea of world, Welt, in phenomenology is a very, very fundamental concept. And in Husserl we find Lebenswelt, life world, and in Heidegger, human being cannot be understood apart from the idea of being in the world. So this is a very fundamental concept, and all the philosophers, phenomenologists, philosophy is impossible without word. And so, how do you say, connection to what we are doing, I find a very big connection because the world is for us a horizon of meaning. So that means I am already constituted in my world. And so the world, I cannot be away from my world. And of course, this world is not simply something abstract or something very, very far away from me. It is something that I lived experience. But of course, this lived experience is part of me, is part of my Umwelt, what we call environment, if we translate it, or surrounding this way. And in the places of African philosophy. So, of course, in philosophy, we know about the Eurocentric dominance, currents we find in philosophy. And so for people to start talking about African philosophy, the place of African philosophy, it means that we are now getting interested in the idea of African experience. And there is no philosophy without a context. And so African context is what has to also be brought to the table. The African life world of seeing the world, not just world as a place, but the world also as experience. And there are a lot of areas that we can explore in this particular idea. And we are just beginning. Is a question we have found, of course, during the time of this conference. Our discussion has never been to show the concrete experiences. We are just trying to find out perhaps place in the idea of where do we find people doing philosophy. We do that in institution, we do them in the religious institution, and so forth and so on. So I find this very interesting. But on another note, maybe at a point in time I will want us to go and start doing the contextual analysis of world and place, than which will take us into phenomenology, because what we are doing here is maybe a sort of geography, the place of African philosophy. And from my field, we have to go beyond that.
Yeah, thank you very much. Great ideas. You just mentioned the Eurocentrism of philosophy, and our center here in Hildesheim is very conscious and critical of these unequal power distributions and relations within the field of philosophy that is not only limited to the inequality between world regions, but there's also language discrepancy and also gender discrepancy. So I would be interested how you would address these problems. So, and further, what could philosophy gain in addressing these issues?
So, in the first instance, I talk in a very contextual form as a phenomenologist, and that is why I would like to not talk about this not from the point of view of post-structuralism or other currents in philosophy, where we can find all this discourse. We are talking about the different inequalities and the different distributions of power. Yes, these are the things that philosophy could help us to sometimes things appear to be evident for us, very self-evident. But one of the teachings of philosophy is that things are not self-evident, because we have to, through questioning, and discover these questions. Of course, for me, the greatest achievement of philosophy is the questioning, not even the answer. The question provokes. It provokes us to get out from our unquestioned assumptions, and our prejudices. When you talk about this inequality of power distribution among gender, race, and all that, I think phenomenology has a very, very, very. It has been seen, and one of my articles and some other editorials I've done in Africa in a magazine called Guide, a newspaper. I did it like 3 years. It addressed this particular issue. I did it almost, was 2 times in a week. 2 times in a month I produced these articles and questioning the structures. And so this is what philosophy should be doing. And I'm interested in this, and to show that for people to create a just society, philosophy has to play a very great role to question. And what philosophy will gain from it? I don't think philosophy is done for anything. The word gain is not a philosophical, that's not what a philosopher is looking for. Maybe gain, somebody might think about the financial or the material. It is to help to make or create a more just society, a society where people are become aware of what they were not aware of because of the invisibility. A lot of people are invisible in the society because of the structures of the society. And it is the work of philosophy to let us descend into the assumed prejudices and the sedimented layer of meaning to show us that maybe there will be new ways to talk and thematize, articulate topics and ideas and issues. So that, for example, in the particular case of women, subjugation, marginalization, this is a concrete example where philosophy can take flesh, because philosophy has to incarnate. And that is why during the time of the conference I was harping at this, that a philosophy that has that is not incarnated, that has no contextual role to play, is a philosophy that can only be done in the head. An abstract philosophy and a philosophy for classroom, but philosophy should go beyond, these abstract forms. And whether there is a gain, time will tell, but at least for some of the questionings of philosophy has helped to clear some of the problems of the society, or at least to make known what people have taken for granted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you very much. And to remain concrete in some ways, you are a speaker of Igbo, one of the languages of Nigeria. So how does philosophizing in Igbo actually look like, or what did you gain from the conference in this regard here? Also, you were 3 Igbo speakers, which I think was very unique to have 3 Igbo speakers united in Germany.
Yes. Actually we were 4 Igbo speakers. Professor Jacob is married to, I think, a Yoruba man. Her husband is Yoruba, but she comes from Umuahia. So a lot of people did not take cognizance of that, but I discovered it. I discovered it 3 days ago, and we were able to socialize more with her, and just a point of which not a lot of people knew that. So we are 4, and in the conference I have tried to show that there are when we talk about African philosophy, Igbo philosophy, we have to define what philosophy is. So that will be the first way to go. And your question is about philosophizing in Igbo, thinking as an African philosopher in the language, thinking in your own life world. And I will answer this question based on 2 concrete distinctions. The distinctions go like in a form of questions. The first distinction to be made is a question of asking what philosophy is. So, what is philosophy? If philosophy is a philosophy that is derived from Greece, from the time of Aristotle, if that is what philosophy is, a philosophy that is capable of universalization, a philosophy that has developed its category, the category of monotheism, which I've already continued to say, that it is a word of its own, an institution of its own. Yeah. So then, talking about African philosophy will be a derivative. It will be derivative. Then that means African philosophy will be impossible. So in that sense, also African philosophy will not be possible. Either to think about it, perhaps the only form it could be possible is to do the classical continental or European philosophy, maybe with African language. That is what it would be like. So this is one resistance to the question, or one distinction to the question. And but if we go to the second aspect of the question, which is what if then philosophy is not that way, it is not a monotheistic institution derived from Greece, and if philosophy can be taken to be possible if from everywhere where people are engaged with logos, the idea of reasoning and different ways of seeing the world and different ways of engaging with their world, then African philosophy will be possible. And in that sense, African philosophy will also be a philosophy that is contextualizing its own life world, its own experience, and its own sedimented layers of meaning. And in that sense, Igbo philosophy would naturally be possible. And what I could add there is that in this sense of doing African philosophy, then we could talk about some of the problems that would have been met in the first one, like in the first questioning. It would then be impossible in some of African philosophies, like in my philosophy, in my African languages, like in my language, which is language of Igbo, to think about Husserl, to think about Heidegger, to think about Merleau-Ponty, Yves Lacoste, and Marc Richy, and all the rest of them, to think about Kant. We don't have the categories to do those forms of philosophy in this sense. Or unless we go into some forms of translations that will not be faithful to the original meaning of those type of philosophy. But if we say that philosophy is possible in the second distinction I made, then African philosophy is possible, and then there is no resistance to this way, and especially in language. And of course, my grandfather, my parents, my family, the clan I come from, the society I come from, there are ways of doing philosophy that are performative, that are not actually, that doesn't correspond to the way of doing written philosophy here in Europe. We have what we call the Obako, Omonna. We have what we call the Alademma. And there are a lot of other groups. So I attended these groups as a child, and the elders, you could call such gatherings something like, political gathering. You could call it economic gathering. You could call it a moral gathering. You could call it a court case. You could call it whatever you want. You could call it a classroom. You could call it an agora where people come and philosophize. But a lot of things happening in the society are settled there. You could call it a rat house, if you like. No problem. It's a governing body of the community. And people come here, they drink wine, and they talk. To give you an insight of what type of things they do, they talk in proverbs. As a child, they talk in proverbs, they talk in different genres of speech. that I'm not in the area of literature. Perhaps I would have then have more vocabularies to describe what they are doing. But so their way of discourse is not like it is one dialogic, it is argumentative and employs other methods of speaking, other methods of speech that are not necessarily European. But you marvel. When they are talking, it's like music. It's like an orchestra. And you see the movement of thoughts and like very powerful dialectics and interpresenting, that they share a lot of things together, and the harmonization that happens, it marveled me as a child to see, and a lot of things we learned came from these type of meetings. There are a lot of better people than me, they are natural philosophers. Not everybody has the capacity to speak this way, so that I would not banalize this meeting. It's not that everybody will come and they begin to speak. There are specialists. When they come, if a case is being handled, they come into it and then they say, no, he's not there. There's one of my uncles, Dabon, and I pronounce his name here because he's dead. I didn't have the opportunity to see him alive. When I left for Europe, he was already sick. He was a very, very renowned figure in my time. He's a great philosopher. He speaks and he ends case. He was, in a European parlance, we could say that he was like a chief justice, the justice that delivers the last arbiter. When he speaks, he has the power of synthesis. And this is what I think that African philosophy looks like in some performative forms. And this is a way also that we can speak of African philosophy. And there are other ways, like in poetry, in music. As a priest, we have some musical heritage, and that drew us into great abyss of thinking and thought. When we hear this music, there is one music we sing, I don't want to go into details. And when you look at a music like this, it could lead you into a form of astonishment, a form of, sublimity, in praise of nature, in praise of everything transcendent. Maybe you talk about theological transcendent or the transcendent of the world of philosophy. This music, and a lot of them, and documented in history, are ways people deal with philosophy because they are performative and they are very deep and profound. People melt at the gaze, at the thought, or as they are being affected by such things like music and poetry. And when I was growing, let me give the last instance. Another way of doing philosophy was also people draw. They draw, and there are people who are sculptors. They are sculptors. They have sculptural materials. And an elderly man will come, and he will say that this is a history. And you can look at the sculptural work, but you are not able to understand it. But I remember one instance, I was in the primary school, and one of the elderly men in the village came to give a narration of a whole history of a particular age with a simple sculptural work. All the information was communicated in this sculptural work. It's a documentation. The problem is not that there was no philosophy. The problem is that there is a disconnection of philosophy, African philosophy. And so the present generation, we are not able to carry out this genre of doing philosophy in Africa, to take it further. And so we have lost some of those people, and they are no longer documented, and we have lost thought of them and this way of doing philosophy due to globalization and other factors that are of course, we know the case situation in Africa, where people are interested to survive. They have other problems. This is not their problem for now. And this makes a great impact on the ways of doing philosophy, and also for reconstructing our philosophy or getting in contact with them. So these are a few examples to clarify what it could be like to do some African philosophy.
Yeah, marvelous. Thank you very much for giving these examples. I can really envision parts of it, and I'm curious to learn more. with my concluding question, I just wanted to come back to our panel, in which we also discussed the role of the church as a place of African philosophy. And I just wanted to ask curiously, you're also a priest, so how in yourself actually does you being a priest, also the theological training, have an impact on how you philosophize, or maybe also the other way around?
Yes, this is a very interesting question. In other words, you are asking me the connection in me of philosophy and theology, or in other words, the connection in me, or the harmony of my faith and the harmony of my reason. Reason is not always the other opposite. Maybe it could also be the harmony of my of my faith and the harmony of my African root. It could be my African root. There are a lot of tensions anyway in this, and as a human being, you feel these tensions, and that makes us human, and that makes for the interesting thing about life. I feel these tensions in my life. I feel the tensions in my life because I understand the philosophical method. I understand the African experience. I understand the theological experience, but I don't see any contradiction. All of them are very well harmonized. But I also see the tensions. The tensions in these do not mean that there is a contradiction. No, there is not necessarily a contradiction. There is a well-grounded integration of these different life worlds in me. So let me say, maybe I am not able to show in a concrete term what these tensions could be. Okay, I could. Let us talk about the tension of being an African, and the tension of doing philosophy. African. So philosophy is more fundamental. It's more fundamental for the development of a society. Philosophy involves some rigor. It involves some rigor, the rigor of thought, of the mind. It involves some forms of abstraction. It involves some forms of idealization. And this is one experience. But on the other hand, the experience of being an African. So the experience of being an African sometimes also help me to throw these questions, right? It helps me to throw this question. But there are also some experience of being an African that we want to put into bracket what philosophy stands for, the value of philosophy, the importance of philosophy. When you see people suffer, when you see people, they are struggling to survive. They suffer, and people who are wounded, people being, who have suffered injustice, discrimination. These things could provoke. These experiences could provoke philosophy, but also they could bracket philosophy. They could jettison philosophy, because in that sense, and that is the danger of doing philosophy in Africa, because in that sense, many people don't see it as important as baking bread, because you want to survive. You are living in the present moment, and you are looking at any possible means for you to survive in the present, to see tomorrow, to be able to survive. And sometimes, so this issue could make you to say no. So it could lead, and it has led, really. It has really led some people to lose value of what it means to live normally as human beings. The value of seeing importance of reconstructing a society. And so it could reduce people to seeing things perhaps from the point of view of not a long term, but the point of view of the now. And so in some instances, it could also lead people to speak from their stomach, and this is dangerous. So the tension is here. But this experience is beautiful. It's experience that helps you also to work well as a theologian, right? It's a beautiful experience that could help you to work well as a philosopher, to question assumptions and to call for reformation, but it also could help you to be efficient as a theologian, to be efficient as theologian. In the theological aspects, theology and my faith as a priest connects me to human experience. So the whole bottom line of the connection is human experience. It doesn't mean that my experience, I live in the world and everybody is living in the world. So the only connection that philosophy might have in a very concrete way with theology or African philosophy, whatever we say, is human experience. We are all human beings. We know what it means to cry. We know what it means to be happy. We know what it means to be cheated. We know all what it means to be marginalized. So we could, perhaps I'm not marginalized as this form of marginalization, but I might be marginalized in another way. But so the experience, we share them. And that is the connection between all these disciplines, human experience. And that is why human experience is the standing point, the point of departure, should be the point of departure for every science. So in human, I'm connected to the human experience. So, and I try to be connected to it, because it is also possible to bracket it and to, lose sight of it and to live in a lofty world. Some people can also live in a lofty world, and they are no longer human. They are living somewhere else because they don't connect to the experiences of the common man. And so, so this is why the way I will look at that issue of connection.
Thank you very much, and thank you for this conversation.
Thank you. You're welcome.